everyone, this is Kevin Powell. I'm sorry for the delay. We had a few technical difficulties. I've actually had some work done on my MacBook the last couple of days, and so I apologize, but I'm glad to be here with Wave TV, and I want to thank Adrian and Vladimir who put this together. We're going to talk about a few things. One, we're going to definitely talk about Trayvon Martin, this Trayvon Martin case. Any of you all who are in New York City heard last night we did a huge rally in downtown Brooklyn where we had over 500 people show up at a church. There were so many people that we had to turn people away, but it was incredible, just outpouring of support and love for Trayvon and his family and this whole situation. As many of y'all know, there's several petitions that have been going around, including one for change.org, where nearly 2 million people have signed that petition. We know that there is an outpouring of support, not just in America, but from overseas. Just in the last couple of days alone, I've done interviews with the BBC, with Russia TV, with other international networks, media outlets, talking about this case. And so we feel that this is really similar to what happened with Emmett Till back in 1955. For those who don't know, a young black male from Chicago who went visiting relatives in Mississippi, and he was accused of either whistling or saying something to a white woman. This was a teenage boy, and the white males in that community did not like what he said or allegedly said, and they beat him up viciously, and they killed him. And that caused a huge amount of response from our community back at that time. And many people say that along with the Brown versus Board of Education decision in 1954, Emmett Till getting killed in 1955 was one of the sparks that lit the civil rights movement. And so I hope that we don't allow Trayvon Martin's murder to be in vain, that we understand that this is something that can bring a whole range of people together to once and for all deal with the conservative movement that's been in this country that created the climate, the atmosphere for this kind of thing to happen, with George Zimmerman thinking that he could be a one-person vigilante, and just because he believed that Trayvon Martin looked suspicious, therefore kill him. So we have to have some honest conversations about race and racism in this country. We have to have some honest conversations about the kind of political climate that exists now that allows this kind of thing to happen. And I think we need to have some honest conversation about what leadership needs to look like in our country in these times. We need to have a different kind of leadership that responds to these types of situations. And so please, looking at Twitter now, and I see that there's questions coming in. Hold on 1 second. 1 second. I'm going to say the names too. Folks tweeting me. Again, please tweet your questions to Kevin at Kevin Powell. I'm sorry, that's my email address. Kevin _Powell. Kevin _Powell. Okay. This is from Sabrina Whiteman. I'm not sure where you're from, Sabrina. Please tweet me where you're from. Your question is, do you know exactly what types of charges, if any, Justice Department would seek against Zimmerman? Actually, that's a good question, Sabrina. I was just talking to one of my fraternity brothers who works for the Department of Justice just yesterday. I'm a member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, which is the oldest collegiate fraternity in the country, black collegiate fraternity in the country. And he said that over the last week there have been 7 Justice Department officials down in Sanford, Florida, monitoring the situation. But the reality is that this is probably going to have to be dealt with by the state of Florida, because it's a state matter and it's but so much that the federal government or President Obama can do. And I know there's a lot of high emotions out there asking, well, why isn't Mr. Obama doing more? Why isn't the Attorney General Eric Holder doing more, particularly as black males? But what people need to understand is a process in place on the state level in every state, with the police force, with the Attorney General there. And that's why they're trying to make sure that this is taken through that process. And it's one of the reasons why I believe the Attorney General from Florida said we're going to have an independent prosecutor in place, because we need to have something that's different than anything that's ever been set up before, since this is just an extraordinary type of case. And so the real issue, Sabrina and everyone else out there, is that we have to keep pressure on the state of Florida. We had a huge rally, as I said a moment ago, in Brooklyn, New York last night, and it was a white sister who got up and said, her name is Michelle Manning Barish, that we need to consider boycotting the state of Florida. She's from Florida, not far from the area where Trayvon Martin is from. And what she was talking about is us considering not supporting the tourist spots in Florida, particularly Orlando with Disney World, obviously Miami, the Florida Keys, anywhere that we would be bringing in, literally millions and millions of dollars. In other words, we need to hit these folks in their pockets until justice is done for this case. And justice is very simple. At this point, George Zimmerman needs to get arrested. And so certainly, the State Department, the Department of Justice is monitoring this. And clearly, Mr. Obama, our president, when he made a statement on Friday that Trayvon could have been my son, they know what's going on. They know that this is a powder keg literally boiling in this country because a lot of people, particularly black males, are very, very tired of being seen as valueless, our lives, by so many folks in this country. Someone just asked me, Shane Neal, I think that's my man Shane Neal from Brooklyn, my thoughts on the Geraldo comments. I thought it was ridiculous. A hoodie, sagging jeans are no reason for anyone to be criminalized. Even if you don't like the fact that young men are wearing sagging jeans and their underwear is showing, and they're wearing Timberlands and the shoes, their Timbs are not loose laced up, or they have hoodies on their heads, or they're wearing do-rags or baseball caps, any of that. It's not justification for anyone being considered a criminal, demonized, or in the case of Trayvon Martin, being murdered. That's completely unacceptable. And when we start talking about fashion, it's a convenient way to take off the table the real conversation, which is Trayvon Martin was not murdered because he was wearing a hoodie. He was murdered because he's a young black man in America. Period. End of story. Other questions? I'm looking for more questions. Let's see. On Twitter again, Sabrina Whiteman, thank you. She's from Brooklyn, New York. Shout out to Brooklyn. I love Brooklyn. That's where I'm at. Representing the DKNY all day, every day. From Patrice D, I'm not sure where she's from, but she says, what do you think about the Zimmerman side of the story that's been released to the press today? For those who don't know, it was released today that Trayvon Martin may have been suspended from high school, for having some marijuana residue on his book bag. Well, guess what, folks? Kevin Powell, when he was a teenager in high school in Jersey City, where I was born and raised, drank malt liquor, and I smoked weed with my friends. That is what teenagers do. But as Sabrina Fulton, as Trayvon's mother, said today, what does marijuana have to do with her son being murdered? Real simple. Has nothing to do with it. Many teenagers, many young people, many older people that I know who are in their 30s and 40s and 50s smoke weed in America. But just because you smoke weed or drink alcohol does not mean you should catch a bullet and die. As simple as that. And so what they're attempting to do now is to smear or kill, for the second time, Trayvon Martin. He was physically killed on Sunday night, February 26th. But what's happening now is that these right-wingers in Florida and around the country and the media are saying we're going to murder his character. So we need to be very aware of what's happening. And I knew this was coming. I knew that they were going to try to find something that they could use to say, see, he was not the angelic figure that people are making him out to be. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if a teenage boy happened to have some marijuana residue in his bag and happened to be suspended from school. What we also know is that Trayvon Martin, like myself, who drank in high school every now and then and smoked weed every now and then, because that's what we did as young men, as young boys, as teenagers. I also was an A student, just like Trayvon Martin. I went to college just as Trayvon Martin clearly was on his way to college. So don't allow anyone to try to change the subject of the conversation from this man, George Zimmerman, needs to be arrested. Period. Period. Going down. Sabrina Whiteman says, I'll bring back to her for a second. She says, my mother is from Florida. She would agree with the boycott and familiar with the climate between blacks and whites. That's something that we have to talk about. My family's from South Carolina. And let me say this, everyone. Let's not get into making it sound like it's just the South with these problems with racism. There's racism all around the country. We just had a press conference today in New York City around the shooting of Ramali Graham, the young black man, a teenager, 18 years old, who was killed by the police in his home as his grandmother and little brother were watching just a few weeks back, right before the Trayvon Martin tragedy happened. So racism is all around this country when we're talking about the issue of racial profiling. And it's real simple. What is racial profiling? In New York City in 2011, according to New York City Police Department itself, there were 683,000 people plus approximately stopped and frisked. A vast majority of them, somewhere close to 85, between 85 and 90%, were black and Latino males. And so you have to really ask the question, why is it that all these black and Latino males are being stopped and frisked and no other communities are being stopped and frisked in this way? And so when we look at what's happening in Florida, let's not look at it as an isolated incident that just happened in Sanford, Florida, or just happened in the South. This is a national phenomenon of my community, specifically black and Latino males, consistently being criminalized and demonized. Period. Back to Twitter. Again, folks, if you have any questions, please hit me on Twitter with your questions. I'm going on Facebook and letting people know real quick that we are live now. Okay, so we're good here. We got more questions coming in. Oh, wow. I see, Shane, good question as well. Shane just asked me a question about Shane Neal, about and let me know if this is Shane Neal from Brooklyn, New York. Thoughts on the Florida self-defense law. In 21 states, approximately 21 states, there's something called Stand Your Ground. And what we need to understand is that the National Rifle Association, a few years back, made a push to make sure that this law would start popping up in states around the country. And basically, the National Rifle Association is one of the biggest and most powerful lobbies in America. And they always hark back to the Second Amendment of the Constitution, the right to bear arms. Now, my position with that is it's problematic for two reasons. One, I live in an inner city community called New York City, Brooklyn, New York, where there's constant gunplay. We don't even know where these guns are coming from. But I'm watching my community of black and Latino males mostly shooting each other because they have such easy access to guns. That's problematic. Number two, when we talk about what George Zimmerman did to Trayvon Martin, there's a whole community of males around the country, either white males or white-identified males, like George Zimmerman, whose father was white and his mother was Latina. But clearly, by the way he's talking about Trayvon Martin on the 911 tape, he was looking at Trayvon through the lens of a white man who was a bigot, who was a racist, by the fact that he called him suspicious, and decided that he wanted to follow or pursue Trayvon Martin. And so when we talk about these self-defense laws, standing your ground, basically the first thing that came out of George Zimmerman's mouth when the whole situation went down is that he felt that threatened and he was simply protecting himself, and it's believed that he and his attorneys are going to try to hide behind that law if they actually are brought to court on this thing. And we are fighting to make sure that happens. But I think that, as Jeb Bush, the former governor of Florida, said, he can't hide behind this law because he was not acting in self-defense. And Jeb Bush is a Republican, and as you all know, the brother of the former President of the United States, George W. Bush. And so even Republicans are saying that's a weak argument to claim self-defense in a situation like this. Again, please tweet me the questions you have at Kevin_Powell. Kevin_Powell. I'm going to say your names and read them off. Rashid Thomas, there he is, my man, young professionals, Urban League young professionals there in New York. His question is, what happened to the black community after the Trayvon Martin case? In an instant I'm trying to see, Rashid, if this is a two-part question. In an instant gratification news society, how do the passionate petition signers keep this momentum? Great question. These are all great questions. And I want to thank you all for these questions. And I definitely want to shout out again Wave 45 TV. Let me get the right name. Wave 45 TV. Adrian and Vladimir for putting this together. I really appreciate you all, and I hope to come back and do this again. And and we talked about this last night, Rashid. We cannot afford for this just to be a moment. This has got to become a movement. Just how the Occupy Wall Street actions in the fall of 2011 became a movement around the country and globally. We need to see, as black people and progressive people of all races, white, Latino, Asian, that all these things are inextricably linked. As I said last time in my speech at the Trayvon Martin rally, Rashid and everyone else, what happened to Trayvon Martin and all the racial profiling we see around the country is directly tied to the Republican attacks on the bodies of women. In fact, they had these hearings just a few weeks ago and didn't even have the decency to have women speaking on behalf of themselves, which has really led to the whole Sandra Fluke controversy when Rush Limbaugh referred to her in some very derogatory ways. This is also tied to the anti-immigration movement in this country, all the rage you see on Latino people in places like Connecticut and San Diego, California. This is tied to the hostilities you see toward Latino people or immigrants in places like Alabama and Arizona. This is tied to all the voter ID laws that are passing around the country, making it much more difficult for people to vote, particularly poor people or working or people of color, people who have lost their homes to the foreclosure crisis, people who may have changed their identity because they're from the transgender community. It's become difficult for them to get new identification. And so those voter ID laws, all these things are about making people to feel like they are just other and less than human and not really part of this society that we call a democratic society. And so it's all connected. And for black people specifically, we have to become involved and engaged in our communities at every level. It's not enough, to vote for Barack Obama. We have to vote without question. But what I'm saying to you all, in 2008, as we were coming out in record numbers, for example, in voting for Barack Obama to be president of the United States, many of us simply bypassed all those propositions that were on ballots around the country. And some of those states which stand your ground propositions, and many of us weren't even paying attention to that stuff. And so that's the kind of thing that I'm talking about. We need to become much more educated voters, and we've got to become engaged in our communities on a regular basis. Last night it was brought up that there's organizations already out there, that are doing great work. Be the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. How many of us actually volunteer for the NAACP Legal Defense Fund? How many of us volunteer or say, how can we help the Center for Constitutional Rights right here in New York City, who's been dealing with this issue of racial profiling for many years? How can we help or support, what's happening with the Malcolm X grassroots movement right here in New York City, which actually trains young people, especially young males of color, know your rights when you're confronted by the police. And so we've got to become actively engaged in our own empowerment. Otherwise, nothing's going to change, and we will be riled up by this whole thing. We'll wear our hoodies for a little while, and then this whole thing will be over. That's unacceptable in 2012. Questions. Sabrina Whiteman says, recently there was another killing of a young black male in Atlanta ATL. Shout out to ATL out there. Love Atlanta. Irvin Jefferson. It sounds familiar to the issue with Trayvon. Well, the reality is, Sabrina, there's so many instances like this. For whatever reason, Trayvon's situation hit a nerve. In fact, the lawyers in the case who are handling, working with the Trayvon Martin's family, have said there at least been 5 or 6 other killings of young black males in that area. But somehow or another, this one just took on a life of his own, and it generated the kind of national and international attention. And I think because it's so egregious, and clearly when you look at it, he has a mother, he has a father, he was an AB student, and he was just going to the store for a bag of Skittles and a can of iced tea. And so people are horrified that something like this can happen, but this literally does happen every single week in our communities. I can't tell you how many young men of color have called me and said, I was just roughed up by the police, or I just was in a community and I was chased out of that community. I mean, it happened to me when I was a young man growing up in Jersey City. And so there's a pattern, again, of racial hatred and racial profiling that exists in our country that has become completely unacceptable. And we have got to make our voices heard as loudly as we did during the Civil Rights Movement. This has got to be a sustained effort. Shane Neal said, yes, it's your boy. Shane, it's time to play basketball, my friend. I just need to throw out there real quick. I know we're talking about something very serious right now with Trayvon Martin and race and racism in America. But, I'm going to pick Kentucky to win it all. That's what I'm going to say. I'm going to say Kentucky's going to win the men's Final Four. All right? And I think Baylor's going to win I need to check the women's bracket and see what's going on there. I don't want to say what I would feel there. people, let me retweet what Wave 45 just said about the questions. Um, Patrice D said, how do we prepare young black men? Can we? We absolutely can. Patrice, I was raised in what we call a ghetto, inner city environment. Jersey City, New Jersey, raised by a single mother with an 8th grade education. I saw my father off and on until I was 8 years of age. My father did not marry my mother. He was at least 10, 11 years older than my mother, but didn't even have the decency to marry her. And he had a job. He was a truck driver. He had a house. He was doing all right for himself. He simply did not show up for his responsibilities. And then when I was 8 years old, he made the grand announcement that he was never going to give my mother a near nickel for her to support me ever again. I haven't seen my father since then. What saved my life and what I feel we have to do to prepare young black males in our communities, one, my mother gave me a spiritual foundation, a deep belief and love for God. And it's not like I like going to church. I'll be lying to you. I hated going to church. And in fact, by the time I was 13, 14 years old, I announced to my mother, when I was big enough to say so, I'm not going to church anymore. I'm good. But the seeds that she planted made me understand, no matter where I went in my life, that I have to value my life because I value what gave me life, and that with this universe, Allah, Jehovah, whatever we call that being, I hope we all believe in something greater than ourselves, or at least, as I say, even if you're atheistic or agnostic and you have that right, you at least have some sort of spiritual moral compass. That's what my mother gave me, a spiritual and moral compass. Number two, my mother gave me a deep appreciation very early on for education. Even though she only had an 8th grade education, my mother barely ever read. She read the newspaper, but she didn't read any books. I don't think she has ever read the Bible in its entirety. She knows passages from it, and she goes to church on a regular basis. So she hears the pastor and other folks talking about parts of the Bible and parables in the Bible. But for whatever reason, my mother understood that the education was going to be my ticket to do something with my life, that was preparation. When you see a lot of the young black and Latino males out there on the streets or in the prison system, because I've done workshops in Rikers Island, which is a prison for those who don't know, outside of New York, upstate New York, where there's tons of prisons with names like Dannemora and Clinton Correctional. The common denominator is how grossly undereducated most of these young black and Latino males are, who've gotten caught up in the criminal justice system, who've gotten caught up in gangs, etc. That's the huge problem here, the lack of any kind of preparation for life. If you can barely read or write, if you can barely do any kind of math, if you don't have your critical thinking skills being developed, if you don't know who you are as a black or Latino person, you don't know your history, you don't know where you came from, you don't understand that the cradle of civilization is that land base we call Africa, your self-esteem is shot, and you will really believe that you're nothing more than an NIGGA. And when you believe that, you will think that your life is not valuable, and other people think that your life is not valuable. So when we talk about how we prepare young black men, it has to be tied to education, and not just the stuff in school, but learning our history inside and out, and not just for a few weeks in February, but literally every single day of our lives is critical. And then the third thing, I think we have to tell young men the truth about the society that we live in. Yes, President Barack Obama is the President of the United States. Yes, we've made tremendous progress since the 1960s. And yes, I, Kevin Powell, love all people. I don't care if you're white, black, Latino, Asian, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, straight, gay. I just love people, period, because I see all of us as sisters and brothers. We're all part of one race, really, which is the human race. That's the real race, which is the human race. However, we'd be lying to these young men of color, black males, if we didn't tell them that this society is debilitated by this disease, this cancer called racism, and that they are going to have a target on their backs all the time, and they need to understand that and need to be prepared for it. One of the things that I was taught when I was a younger man was how to conduct myself if confronted by the police. One of the first things I was told by the folks training me was make sure your hands are always visible. Make sure if you're traveling in a car with other young black males, do not travel in that car with liquor or marijuana, anything like that. In other words, don't give anyone any additional reason to do anything to you. Now, does that guarantee that nothing's going to happen to you? Look at Trayvon Martin. Look at DJ Henry, who got a Pace University student who got and football player who got murdered by the police a couple of years ago up there in Westchester County. No, it does not. But we do need to be wise about the society that we live in and understand that we have to take as many precautions as possible, even as we know that anything can happen at any given time, given the nature of our society still in 2012. Wow, that's a lot of questions. Beyonce called me Diva. I like that name. She said it's time to go back to the early days of the civil rights movement and target these state laws that target black folks. I agree with you, and understand that I want us to be clear though, even though the civil rights movement was created and propelled by black people, it's really about making the entire country more democratic. And so anything that any of us do will be for the benefit of the whole country. I mean, look at the voter ID laws. That's something that goes back to the days of coming out of slavery with poll taxes and the grandfather clauses, where you had to prove that you were actually a citizen in order to vote. And here we are in 2012 doing the same thing over and over, same things all over again with a new name. It's called voter ID now. And so we certainly need to understand what's going on in the state in which we live. I agree with you, Beyonce. Asha Terry asked the question, where would you like us to go in a few weeks, most with empowering coping? I hope I understand the question correctly, Asha. I think that we have to create a movement. We have to get organized. We need to keep the pressure on the Florida State Attorney General. We need to keep the pressure on the state of Florida. I do think we need to talk about seriously boycotting that state, just the way we had the Montgomery bus boycott in 1955, as you all know, which effectively shut down the financial stability of that public transportation system until they desegregated that bus system, which was led, as we know, by Dr. King. We need to take it on that level, Shane, I just mentioned the new hurdles to voting. I've been talking about voter ID. In fact, folks out there, I write a weekly blog for theguardian.com. I started this year in January. I haven't. If you go to theguardian.com and do a search for Kevin Powell, all of my blogs will come up. And in the last couple of weeks, I've written a blog about Trayvon Martin, obviously the most recent one. But I have a piece before that, a blog before that, a week before, called Voter ID. I can't remember the rest of it, but you will see that, and it lays out very clearly what is happening with voting in this country. So what I recommend to all of you is that whatever state that you are in, and even if you're overseas, I hope you read it as well, but if you're an American citizen or live in America, please know what is happening in your state around voter ID. The way that these folks continue to change these laws and manipulate what is happening in this country to the detriment of many people of many backgrounds is that many of us are grossly misinformed or underinformed, and there's no excuse for that in 2012 when we all have access to the internet. Look how we're communicating right now. All you have to do is Google what is the process for voting in Texas? What is the process for voting in New York, in California, in Oregon, in Alabama, wherever you are? That's called self-empowerment. We have to do that. Okay, I'm looking for more questions. And Adrian and Glad, I can stay on 12 more minutes to 9 o'clock if that's okay with you all. My conference call got postponed. Are y'all cool?
Yep, that works just fine, man.
Okay, how's it looking at you all then?
Everything's going fine, man. We're sending you a bunch of questions on Twitter.
Okay.
Check your mentions on Twitter.
Okay. So someone asked, what social model should Black America follow to make us stable? I think it's all in our history. Adrian's family is originally from Jamaica, the West Indies, and one of my favorite leaders of all time is a man named Marcus Garvey. Marcus Garvey came to America right in the midst of World War I in the 19-teens. He came there because he was deeply inspired by an African-American leader named Booker T. Washington, who created a model that still stands to this day, which is build an institution that serves your community. In fact, before I even go into that model question, that was asked. I want to say this, y'all. Leadership should be one of three things. Otherwise, people should not even call themselves leaders in 2012 for black people or white people or Latino people, Asian people, LGBT people, Native American people, Middle Eastern people, Jewish folks, everyone. You should not call yourself a leader if, one, you are not putting out language and vocabulary that is changing the direction of conversation. We need to go in different directions. That's what a leader does. You don't keep saying the same stuff over and over again, using the same language over and over again, using the same paradigms over and over again. That is completely unacceptable to expect in 2012 something that you used in 1992 or 1972 or 1952 to work in the 21st century. And so what leadership has to do is remix stuff and come up with a new way of saying things. For example, I am so clear that I'm a beneficiary of the civil rights movement. I'm so clear about that. But I think it's ridiculous in 2012 that that's the only term that is used to apply to black folks. It's so much more than that. And so I'm saying to you all, when I go travel around Brooklyn, New York, most heads in Brooklyn like civil rights. I don't even know what that is, son. I don't know what you're talking about. But if you say jobs, you need a job. You want to get to a college, you want to get to a community college, you want to get to a trade school, you want an education, then people's ears perk up, You want to be financially well off. Yeah, I need money, son. I need something. I need a plan. And so leadership understands where the people are, and you actually take the language of the people, and then you turn it into the direction we need to go. Number two, if you're going to call yourself a leader, we're talking about models here, you have to create institutions, businesses, resources, or services that serve the people. Perfect example of that is the live stream that we're doing right now. It's called Wave 45 TV. Adrian and Vladimir had a vision. We want to have people be able to communicate with each other, which is a service. Let us have a dialogue with each other. And so, therefore, they're doing something that's very beneficial. And so if someone calls himself a leader and all you see them doing is being on television all the time, on the radio all the time, just talking, you should ask yourself a very simple question. What services do they actually provide to the community on a regular basis? Are they helping people get jobs? Are they helping people who are coming out of the penitentiary? Who may have criminal records, have felonies? Are they helping folks get to college or trade schools? Are they helping people with their housing situation? Basic day-to-day type of stuff. And number three, if you're going to call yourself a leader, you got to be accessible to the people. You have to be available. People have to know that they can talk to you, that you're reachable, that you will respond to their emails at least some of the time, or their phone calls some of the time, or someone from your office, your staff will do that. How are you going to be a leader in 2012, claim to be representing this community or that community, and people can't even get in touch with you? Or when you are out in public, you act like you don't even want to be bothered with people as they're trying to talk to you. That's not leadership. And so when we talk about models, I think to answer that question, we've got to create those models. And I've been thinking about this for several years. And so I began to say to myself, instead of letting other people define what leadership is for me or for us, we need to start defining what leadership should look like. And then in terms of our communities, I'll just say this, because we don't have enough time, but Glad and Adrian, I would like to come back on, and I was serious about that, doing a couple hours, and I really would like to run through this. But I think that for all of our communities in America, and since the question was directed for a second specifically to Black America, I think there's 6 areas where communities around the country need to be empowered: spiritually, politically, culturally, financially, in terms of financial awareness, financial literacy, and understanding that we can't just be consumers our entire lives, but we have to learn how to be owners in different ways. And then 2 areas we don't like to talk about. Number 5, physical health and mental wellness. And I'd like to come back and really break that down in terms of a model for the holistic development of all of our communities around the country, where people can feel like, they don't have to be completely dependent on elected officials or spiritual or religious leaders for all the answers. They begin to realize that the leadership that we're actually waiting for is us. I'm looking at Twitter, and we have about 7 minutes. Hold on a second. It's a lot of questions, so I apologize in advance if I don't get to all these questions. I apologize. This is a good question. This is about hip-hop. Given how hip-hop culture is being, again, blamed for violence against us, How does the culture defend itself to the public? Well, that's you know, I tell you what, Glad and Adrian, maybe I need to come on for 3 hours, and 1 hour needs to be specifically just about hip hop. I grew up in the culture. Let me say this: we need to make a distinction between hip hop culture and hip hop the industry. The culture is 5 basic elements: it's the DJs, MCs, graffiti writing and graffiti art. It's the dance element, which could be everything from breakdancing, popping, locking, right on up to doing the Dougie in 2012. And then the 5th element of hip hop, according to the founding father, Africa Bambaataa, is knowledge, knowledge, knowledge. And so we need to understand that the culture are those 5 core elements, but it's also language, it's the way we walk, the way we talk, it's our fashion. There's hip hop photography, there's beatboxing, there's all types of things that are connected to the culture. The culture was created by working class people, poor people in the Bronx, New York, in New York City. And I always say that hip hop is making something out of nothing, which is 2 turntables, a microphone, some sneakers, some cardboard, some linoleum to dance on, some magic markers, some spray paint, and look how it has turned into the most dominant youth culture of the past 30 years or so. And so we need to understand that's the culture, but the industry, which is what you all are talking about, is the culture being turned inside out and not being about life. It has been turned into being about death. Blatant disrespect for women, which is reflecting a large society, because hip-hop is not just sexist. All of America happens to be sexist and patriarchal and misogynistic, and hip-hop simply is a mirror reflecting what's going on in the country and with us men. The excessive materialism, the anti-intellectualism, the violence, the homophobia, all those different things are part of what we call the industry. And the problem is a lot of folks have gotten so caught up in the industry aspect of hip-hop that they have ignored the cultural part of it. And as a result, Trayvon Martin gets murdered and barely anyone is saying anything. Sinead O'Connor should not be one of the few artists writing a letter about the Trayvon Martin situation all the way from Ireland. And we need to ask the question: where are the rappers who are famous and who talk about their watches and their cars and all these other things? Why aren't they saying anything? And so I think that this needs to be a wake up call for a lot of people. That if you are that bold, if you're so gangster enough to shoot someone because you're blood and they're a Crip, you're so gangster to get on a record, a CD, and diss someone because you don't like the way they said something about you on a CD. Why aren't you gangster enough to say that George Zimmerman needs to be arrested? Simple question. How we doing on time, gentlemen? I think we got 3 minutes left.
You got 3 minutes, man.
Okay. I'm just trying to. Wow, there's a lot of tweets. Someone asked me what I think about the U.S. situation in Syria. That's a whole other conversation. I really need a lot more time to really talk about the policy of our country in the Middle East in general, and I have a lot to say about that, but I don't want to get into that now because I would be a condensed response. But I will say in general, I do not believe in war. I have come to this point in my life where I believe in nonviolence, peace, and love, and I think that we've got to find alternative ways to deal with conflict in any society. And violence just begets violence. I never thought I'd come to a space where Dr. King was or where Gandhi was, but that's what I believe now in 2012, and this is what I'm going to believe for the rest of my life. We need a world that's filled with nonviolence, peace, and love, and we need to see all of us as sisters and brothers and part of one race, which is the human race. And until that happens, we're going to have nonstop conflict. I just answered the question, Nekadana, about hip-hop. I hope you heard me. Is this being archived, Vladimir?
Yep.
So people can hear this at another time.
Yep.
Okay. All right. And so I appreciate y'all tweeting out that I will be back at another time. Any other questions? Wait. Aaron Turner asked, do I think the Trayvon Martin murder could spark another civil rights movement? Aaron, I just talked about that. So please, folks who missed this, who came in late, there's an archive of this conversation. What I'll say is, Aaron, we do need a movement, but let's get a new name for it. Let's let the civil rights movement be the term that was used back in the day. We have a responsibility to create new names, a new language, and a new direction for where we're going in 2012. And I want to challenge us as thinkers, as leaders, whatever we call ourselves, to do that. close this out. We just have 1 minute left, and I apologize again for the technical difficulty. It was actually me, not Wave 45 TV. I had an old version of Adobe Flash on my computer. Everything else is upgraded, and I didn't realize that was old. So I apologize that we started about 15 minutes late. I hope you all forgive me for that. I want to thank you all for these great questions, and I just want to again encourage people, no matter where you live in the country or where you live in the planet. As I said on one of my Facebook posts today, you have to be engaged in your community. You have to be engaged in some way. It's not enough to live this life, and you're just thinking about yourself and taking care of your own material well-being. Nothing wrong with having a life that is prosperous in whatever way you define prosperous. But to me, the true mark of any life is, what did you do to help and serve other people? What did you do to help and serve other people, no matter who they are? And did you speak up when you saw injustice in any form? That's what we're talking about, and that should be the legacy of Trayvon Martin. Did you speak up when you had an opportunity to say something about something that is wrong? All right, y'all? And so I just want to say I love and appreciate all of you, and I thank you all, and we're going to definitely do this again. God bless everyone.